We are at the one and only Disney Animation Research Library, also called the ARL.
We are the repository of just about all the animation art that the Walt Disney Company has created for its shorts and features from the 1920s to current day. No other facility in the world has been designed and built like this to care for what is essentially our 65 million pieces of physical art in the collection.
Coming here to the Animation Research Library really let us look at some of those ideas from the past 100 years to see how the artists approach things.
We actually got to be there and actually look at the paper and wear the white gloves and look at all of the individual drawings.
We were literally looking at the paintings and going, how did they use the line work on that cloud? What was the brush stroke like? Because we're going a step beyond what we've done in the past and really celebrating these magical things we find here at the ARL.
We've been able to draw from our 61 feature films and numerous shorts over the years to be able to give those nods to Disney history in every shot in the film.
If these were actually the real artwork, we wouldn't be having our paw prints all over these. Yeah. But the Animation Research Library was kind enough to print these out for us so that we could handle them. To have this be a celebration of 100 years, we didn't create an art style just for its own sake. We dipped back into Disney legacy to come up with this concept so that it's purposeful.
I do remember, Mike, when you said that you wanted to have it feel like it was paying homage to the past, but not to have the film feel like it was stuck in the past. What would Walt be doing if he had this kind of technology?
Yeah, to go backwards in order to go forwards.
Well, Snow White and Pinocchio came to mind straight away.
Yeah. In those films, they used watercolor, and it had a very romantic fairy tale feel. That 19th century illustrative fairy tale look would have been very familiar to Walt Disney as a boy. So he was dipping back into a certain kind of nostalgia from his childhood, which is why this look was so important to him. So I mentioned to our directors, would it be viable to create an art look that channels this hand-drawn look?
When Mike came to me and told me how he wanted to go back to these turn-of-the-century golden age of illustrators, I was in hook, line, and sinker. The real challenge was, how are we going to do this in CG? And that was the part that was a little scary.
Did you ever think that they would chicken out? Like, oh, this is great, but we can't do a whole movie?
But we have such really bright, talented people. I just had a feeling it was going to get done.
When you watch these older Disney films, if you pause the film, you're going to look at a beautiful illustration. Everything's composed, the silhouettes are really beautiful. And so how do you get that look on every frame in a three-dimensional film?
Just the nature of CG is that it lends itself to more detail. And there was a lot of intentional effort put on this film to pull away when you had to and put in when you had to. So the right balance of that was not an easy one to find.
We treated shots in a very illustrative way. I promise you, we looked at every single frame to make sure that the composition was holding up.
We wanted each frame to look like an art piece. I think that's what we set out to do, so each frame was actually an art piece.
And it took every department to hold hands and agree to do that.
So Lisa was really at the forefront of analyzing this great legacy watercolor look. I call you our creative analyst. You know how to creatively pull things apart to analyze why does something work the way it does.
There were two things that were super, super important to the look of what we did on this project. In these old illustrations, there's this little white edging that happens when you pull a piece of paint next to another piece of paint, and it's the negative space in between. And then lighting was able to do a thing called munging and edge pooling, which is where you get a shadow and there's this little dark edge where the pigment has kind of migrated to the edge and then dried. Those are those sweet little things that make it feel really like illustration. That makes a huge difference.
The feeling of everything being handcrafted, though. Even if it's being done in CG, the CG people had to handcraft when to munge and when not to.
Did munging exist before this movie?
Not in terms of in connection with paint.
Oh.
Or
when to munge and when not to munge.
Wait, yeah.
We had lots of discussions about depth of field. And depth of field being, you know, when you focus on something really close, everything else goes out of focus. Which is a very kind of more live action type feel. But we had this illustrative look, so we wanted everything to be in focus like you would with illustration.
It's hard to give up depth of field, and we use it so much in our films, but the question was, what do we use it for? And it's to bring our characters off the background so you can really focus on them. So then, what would an illustrator do to achieve that?
You want the background to look beautiful, but also just complement the foreground.
Obviously, our tools allow us to have incredible detail everywhere, but in so many of the shots, we are throwing away so much of that detail in the background as an illustrator would, because it's not what you're supposed to look at.
You know, a great example of that is the crowds on this movie.
Yeah. The art team had a vision on how they wanted the crowds to fit as a part of that sort of a vision of illustration, so that there is a foreground level of detail, a midground, and then a background.
You know, if you look at some of the very background crowds, the head will just be a little, you know, paint stroke, a little watercolor. Yet it's a full crowd that's been animated.
Yeah. The frame suddenly looks like the older films that had the hand-drawn feel to it. So that was a very intentional effort.
So if you see a crowd character without a face
Yes.
in this movie,
It's intentional.
it was intentional.
It looks beautiful.
In a traditional CG film that all audiences are familiar with today, there is no line work on character. But in a traditional hand-drawn Walt Disney film, characters were defined by line work around facial features in certain postures of the costume, and then that was just filled in with solid color. So, in discovering aspects of line, how thick is the line? How thin is it? Is there too much line on the face? All these things we had to figure out kind of step by step.
The line weight was important to the age of the character, the emotion of the character.
What looked good on the 100-year-old grandfather Sabino may not look good on Asha. So there was a lot of work put into building the character so that when the line work was applied, it all works together.
Oh, that's it? Now you're done talking?
There were more than a few times where we would hit a point of problem solving where we were like, well, what did they do on Pinocchio?
So like the Pinocchio test was a classic example. We took most elaborate backgrounds that I know of from Pinocchio, and we said, how would we do that in our world? And it's finding that balance of it's 3D, but it has that 2D feel.
That long tracking shot was so cool to see. This is something made in 2023 that like feels like it's of today, but it calls back to those earlier movies.
If you look at this pan background from Pinocchio, we literally took half of it, and then we did a render of Asha and had her literally walk through this Pinocchio painting to see how she would fit in.
Yep, I remember that test. That was incredible.
And that was our moment of truth, right? Oh my gosh, she is a watercolor animated character walking through a Pinocchio background. That's when we knew we were on our way.